Chapter 8. "Have a good evening," Lisa said Saturday afternoon at 4:30 as she strode through the outer office, her hair in a ponytail and sweats gracing her frame. Sherry's face dropped in surprise. "Where are you going?" "Rock climbing," Lisa said as excitement pulled a smile to her face. "See ya." And she left her secretary open-mouthed, staring after her. By the time he yanked the electric blue pullover and black jeans on Saturday at 5, there were so many emotions swirling around in Jeff's body, brain, and heart that he couldn't catch even one of them long enough to analyze it. Excitement was there, but so was dread and fear, and the certainty that somehow he would find a way to mess this up. This wasn't really a date, he told himself. Well, it kind of was. But if he thought about the implications of that too long, he was sure his brain would completely short-circuit. Running a quick comb through his short black hair, he pulled the chain from the dresser, put it on, and looked down at the cross. "You're going to have to help me with this one, God, 'cause I have no idea what I'm doing." "Do you know how insane this is?" Lisa asked as she stood strapped to a hard nylon cable at the bottom of a jutted beige-brown structure, curving its way up a side wall that loomed 2 stories above them. That wall looked much taller than it had in the brochure she had picked up months before, and the music blaring on the speakers sounded like a nightclub gone mad. "Hey, this was your idea," Jeff said, sliding the spotter's harness around his waist. As she adjusted her own harness, Lisa's gaze snapped to the glint of the gold chain at his neck. Between that cross and the electric blue shirt curving right along with his muscles, she knew the wall was going to have a hard time holding her attention. "Well, next time, talk me out of it," she breathed, wondering what part of her said this was a good idea. One more cinch, and he grabbed the rope between them. "Okay, I'm ready." Her gaze traveled up the rock, and then she shook her head. "I'm not. Let's go home." She turned from the wall, although she was still strapped to it. However, she hadn't taken even a step when he grabbed her shoulders to stop her. "Hey, now, no chickening out." Laughing softly, he turned her back to the wall. "Now get up there." Exhaling slowly, she took a step forward, reached up for the first handhold, and laid a foot on one lower. One pull, and she was up 6 inches from the ground. That wasn't so bad. She reached for the next one and wound her foot around beneath her to find a support. Up. "Cool," he said from behind her, and she felt the slack go out of the rope. "Looking good." At that moment, it entered her mind what he was actually looking at, and still holding on, she glanced back at him. "Hey, now, keep your mind on the rocks." It was. Then he laughed. Well, mostly. She reached up, 2 more movements, and she was a full 4 feet off the ground. "Would now be a bad time to tell you I'm afraid of heights?" His laugh jumped to her ears. "I think you should have thought of that before now." The laughter faded. "Just don't look down." "Don't look down," she said to herself. That ought to be easy enough. A hand, a foot, a hand, a foot, and she reached the first big jut. "So, how does popcorn in a movie sound?" "For tomorrow?" "No, for right now." Her body was climbing even as her mind tried to find something else to think about. "Have you ever heard the term concentration?" he asked as the slack disappeared from the rope. "You might want to try it sometime." "Have you ever heard the term scared to death?" One hand reached up to the little rock she could barely get to as her knee arched onto the jut. The only good thing was that if her own body failed her, she knew his wouldn't. The only bad thing was, what her body really wanted to do was turn around and look at his holding her there. "You're doing good. Don't stop now." "How tall do you think this thing is anyway?" "I don't know. 45 feet?" "Really?" She started to look at him, but her hand didn't quite have hold, and it slipped off, sending her crashing into the hard surface. Ow! You okay? Crud, she said, holding on with one hand as she shook her other hand and examined her nails. I broke a nail. You want to come down? She looked up and then down. Halfway. There was no halfway in her vocabulary. No, I made it this far. I'm not quitting now. With renewed determination, she reached up and grabbed a support. Do you have any idea how sore I'm going to be in the morning? A little. Yeah, a little, she said as her foot found another hold, and her gaze slipped up the side of the rock that now angled just enough backward to make her stomach turn. Pushing that away, she willed her arms not to fail her. One grab, two, she could see the top now. It was only a few handholds up. The pull on her arm muscles was unbelievable. It felt like 5 Gs of torque stretching every fiber. Whose dumb idea was this anyway? She asked the ceiling above her. There was only one more hold to the ceiling. She could see it, but her body was already stretched to its limit. As she clung there like Spider-Man, she looked around, trying to see a way to get to that last one without having the ability to fly. Her arms were screaming at her to just go back down, but that one more hold taunted her. Just one more. What's wrong? He called from far below her. I'm just not. As she stretched for the last hold, her foot slipped away from its mooring, and her body spun away from the wall dangerously. Ah! A hand, a foot, and suddenly the only part of her attached to the wall was one hand stretched far above her. It's okay, I've got you. The rope around her tightened as her body screamed in fright. Frantically, she lurched for the hold above her as panic shrieked that she was going to fall if she didn't get a hold of something. Lisa, it's okay. I've got you. Let go. Her heart dropped right through the center of her chest. How far had he said she was above the ground? It felt like miles. Finally, her hand found the other hold. She grabbed onto it, but when she forced her other arm to retake the other hold, tears sprang to her eyes. There was no strength left in it. Listen to me, he called from below, concern bleeding through the words. Just let go. I've got you. Lisa, let go. And then what? I crashed to the ground? No way. She reached up to grab the support again, but sharp pain screeched down her arm with the effort. How many handholds were there on the way back down? Hello, am I going to have to come up there and get you? He asked. Because I will, you know. Humiliation crowded through her. If her arm just didn't hurt so badly, she could make it back to the ground on her own. Lisa, let go. This time it was a command, not a request. Then his voice softened. I promise I won't let you fall. Squeezing her eyes against what would happen next, she released first one foot, and then the other slipped from its hold. For one small moment, the rope jerked, and her heart jumped into her throat. But in the next heartbeat, she was floating downward as peacefully as if she was on a cloud. Small jerks, and only that as she slowly drifted to the ground. The closer her feet got, the more her shoulder hurt, and she reached up and rubbed it gingerly as tears stung her eyes. 2 seconds after her feet hit the mat, he was next to her. Are you okay? Yeah, she said furiously as she beat the tears back, but I didn't make it to the top. Well, you got back down in one piece. That's what counts. Annoyance with herself seeped through her as she looked at him. I think I'll just go grab something from the snack bar. You can find somebody to spot you. Her hands were working to unlock the harness at her waist and chest, but her right arm hurt every time she so much as moved it. That's okay. With no hesitation, he reached over to help her, and in 2 clicks, she was free. I'm not really in the mood to go up tonight anyway. But Quickly, he let his own harness down to the floor. "What do you say? How does a hot dog sound?" An instant of embarrassment and reluctant gratefulness washed over her. Wonderful. Seated across from her in the little booth, Jeff looked over at her, exhausted and clearly in pain when she moved. He couldn't quite figure out why she had suggested the outing in the first place. On top of that, he wasn't at all sure he should ask. "How's the fingernail?" She pulled one hand up to display the jagged white over red index nail. "It's been better." "How's the shoulder?" Her gaze fell to the table as her opposite hand reached up for it. "Sore." The question tracked across the middle of his forehead. "You know, we could have just gone to the movies or something." "I figured you'd be bored at the movies." "Bored? I love the movies. Besides, it's better than you getting hurt." Slowly she shrugged. "I just thought this looked like fun, but I either never had time or I never had anyone to go with." He swirled the water in his glass. "Your friends didn't want to go?" "What friends?" she asked, and the admission in that question pulled her gaze down. "Your friends," he said as he leveled a questioning gaze on her. "You know, the people you hang out with?" "The people I hang out with are the 3 people who work for me, and I don't think they'd consider me a friend." "But surely you have, I don't know, college friends, high school friends, something." Back and forth her head moved, and his heart fell at the sad look on her face. "I've had a few friends here and there, but I guess I never made the time to really hang on to them. Most of them, I don't even know where they are now." "But you go out, surely." "On business," she said, and he saw the cringe. "Or with Haley once in a while, but that won't be happening much anymore." He watched as she leaned over next to the wall, her ponytail swinging gently over her shoulder. "I wanted to get ahead, so I put all my energy into making the company a success." She laughed. "Bad thing is, it's still a disaster, and what do I have to show for it?" If he could have put his arms around her, he would have. "Number 76, the speaker above them said, and Jeff looked up. "I'll be right back." With a swipe, he collected their food from the front counter and angled his way back over to the table where he set her hot dog and fries in front of her. "You need ketchup or mustard?" Without looking up, she nodded, and he turned back for the condiments. When he came back, he could see by her face that it was time to talk about something else. "Have you ever dropped mustard on the carpet?" She glanced up at him as if he had just dropped there from Mars. "No, seriously." He worked putting ketchup on his plate before holding up the little bag he had just opened. "You want some?" Slowly, she nodded. "I was making a sandwich at my apartment one time, and I dropped a whole jar of mustard, and now there's this horrible yellow stain right under one of the bar stools. I've tried everything, but I think that thing is part of the carpet now." "Did you try vinegar?" Lisa asked, taking one fry out of the basket. "No." "You should have just put vinegar on it and laid a towel over it." "That works?" "It's supposed to. I read that somewhere. I always thought it was a good thing to know, but I think you have to do it right away before it sets." "So it wouldn't work now?" She shrugged and winced with a movement. "You could try it. What's it going to hurt?" His glance chanced down to her uneaten food. "You not hungry?" "Oh." She looked at the hot dog with chili still lying whole in the basket. "I'm not sure how to pick it up." He thought for a second. "Sit tight." Quickly, he jumped up and went to the counter where he retrieved a small plastic fork. When he returned, he slid her basket over and cut the hot dog into 8 portions. Then he slid the basket back and laid the fork with it. "There, that ought to help." She reached in, not bothering with the fork, grabbed one small bite from the end and popped it into her mouth. "Better?" Her eyes danced with gratefulness. "Much." Later, as she lay between the cool sheets and took the heating pad off her shoulder, Lisa smiled as the memory of him waltzed through her head. He still hadn't kissed her, but in reality, he had touched her far more deeply than anyone who ever had. As she closed her eyes, the feeling of floating, supported by the anchor of him, drifted over her. It was a feeling she could get used to. Although she really wanted to just chunk work, it was piling up. So Sunday, when he called, she had to tell him no. Monday was the same story, although he was on shift anyway. By Tuesday, however, Lisa was starting to worry that he might just stop calling altogether, although she had done her level best not to give him that impression on the phone. As she sat in her office on Tuesday evening, she glanced at the clock and concern traced through her. He hadn't called, and as normal as that should have felt, it didn't feel normal at all. The questions flowed through her. Had he been called in? Was there some big fire she hadn't heard about? Hoping she would see nothing, her gaze traveled up from her paperwork and back over her shoulder to the bits of the sky she could see beyond the windows. No billows of smoke that she could see, and yet there was so much she couldn't see. Stop thinking about that. You're going to make yourself crazy. Lisa, Sherry said at the door. Yeah? I'm going to take off. Okay. However, Sherry didn't move. And there's someone here to see you. Tucker. The name slammed into Lisa's consciousness on the dreamy sound of Sherry's voice. Gently, Lisa reached up and rubbed her still tender shoulder as she prayed for the strength to fight him off. Knowing that letting him into her office would be a huge mistake, she stood and righted her suit jacket as Sherry turned back for the front office. Lisa's stride held determination and dignity as she rounded the desk and followed her secretary out and into the reception area. Sherry, did you find those? However, the instant Lisa stepped into the outer office, the sentence stopped. There, in the middle of it, stood a dream she hadn't even allowed herself to have. Black jeans, white t-shirt, denim cover shirt, that gold cross. The beauty of the single pink rose he was holding paled in comparison to him. Jeff. Hi, he said, but his gaze couldn't quite hold hers. I thought I'd stop by and bring you this. Awkwardly, he held it out to her, and her left hand reached over to accept it. Thanks. The petals looked like soft velvet, and Lisa couldn't help but put it to her nose and breathe in its sweet, soft fragrance. Air flowing into her lungs felt so good that she took another long smell, and the top of her brain started swimming from all the oxygen. I'll just... Sherry said, quietly gathering her things and pointing to the door. Lisa didn't have the presence of mind to say goodbye. Seconds flowed past each other like water over river rocks, as in Sherry's absence, the silence of the office engulfed them. Finally, Lisa's sanity cracked back into place. Come on in. You sure? He asked as his hands found the pockets of his jeans. Yeah. Maybe your brain will work better than mine seems to be. In an I can't believe he's here haze, Lisa walked back into her office, feeling his presence fill the room around her the second he stepped through that door. At first, she laid the rose on her desk, but the desk was such a mess she picked it up again and laid it on the top of the computer monitor. In rapid succession, her hands flitted over the desktop, trying to clear it off enough so she wouldn't look so chaotic, and so she could actually see him when she sat down. Suddenly, she noticed that he was still standing in front of the desk. Oh, please, have a seat. Slowly, he slid into one of the chairs, and his gaze on her yanked up her nerves in fistfuls. So this is where the magic happens. Well, this is where something happens, but I'm not sure it could be called magic. In her hands was a stack of files, and she looked around for a good place to put them. Finally, in desperation, she stacked them on the floor next to the wall, careful to let her left arm do most of the moving. I'm sorry, if I would have known you were coming... Hey, you don't have to clean on my account. I work in a fire station, remember? Why that made a difference, she couldn't quite tell, but still, she appreciated the effort. Seeing the utter futility of her cleaning efforts, she finally sat down and folded her hands on her desk. "So, what's up?" As if it took real effort, he shrugged as he shifted slightly in the chair. "I was just driving by, and I figured you've seen where I work, so..." She wished she'd had a week to get the office presentable. That's why she usually used the conference room for one-on-one meetings. That way nobody saw how jumbled her life really was. Her gaze chanced around the office, even now, wanting to find a way to keep him from seeing the mess. "Did you want to go get something to eat or something?" "No, I'm sorry," he started to say. "This was a bad idea. You're working. I shouldn't have come." "No." The word jumped from her throat and her heart simultaneously. "I mean, you don't have to leave or anything. I just thought, sitting in an office all night isn't exactly the greatest date experience." "Yeah, well, we all know how wonderful the last one of those we had turned out." That lopsided smile played through her brain as, half standing, half sitting, he looked right at her. "How's your shoulder anyway?" "As long as I don't get it past there." She raised it midway to shoulder level and winced in pain. "It's great besides that." "See, maybe we'd be safer just hanging out doing..." He sat back down. "What is it you were doing again?" Stress blindsided her, and she sighed heavily. "Camden Foods. I've got to find a workable concept tonight, and nothing sounds right." Skeptically, he looked across her desk at the scattered mock-ups. "Well, what have you come up with so far?" She fingered one paper, wondering how he was suddenly sitting across from her asking to see her work. A moment of decision, and she stacked the papers together and handed them across the desk. "They're not very good." His gaze held hers for 1 second before she dropped the papers into his hands. Slowly, he pulled himself up in the chair with his elbows. Then he grew still, and her heart stopped. Trying to find something else to think about, or at least look at, she refocused her attention on her computer. Being graded, she hated that. "This one's pretty good," he said after her nerves had crawled all the way outside her skin. She looked over, and her eyebrows arched in revulsion. "That one?" "Yeah, I like the fade thing on the edges." He glanced at her. "What, you don't like it?" "That's like the worst one of all of them." "Cool," he said as his eyes danced. "If that's the worst one, then there's got to be something we can use." He picked up a cotton candy pink one. "How about this?" The laugh jumped to her throat as she shook her head. "You're kidding, right?" "Not the color, but I like the line. Where Houston shops. Nice, short, catchy." "It's not too bad," she admitted with a small smile. Her hand reached over and clicked the mouse across her computer as she pulled that one back up and cut out the tag before placing it on a new sheet. "Now, I like this one, the whole display falling over on the guy. Funny." From the fringes of her eyelashes, she looked over at him, and her heart said that not one of her employees had ever put even a tenth of this much heart into any project they had ever worked on. "Here, look at this." He pulled himself forward to her desk. "You take the tag from this one, and the color off of this one, and the concept from this one." His gaze snagged on hers. "What?" Lisa couldn't have stopped the smile had she tried. "You?" "Me?" "Yes, you." Had she tried to explain it, she couldn't have, so she ducked her head. "Show me what you're thinking." 3 hours later, they had mock-ups for the billboards, the newspapers, and the store circulars. Outside, there was nothing but faded sunlight twining through the buildings beyond. Jeff watched her stand from her desk and stretch in that deep navy suit. "So, how long have you been in that chair?" he asked as she got ready to go. "How long have you been alive?" she asked, grabbing a few more things before she picked up her keys and the rose. "You really need to get out more." "Uh-huh." She followed him out and locked the door behind them. "We tried that, remember? I think I'm safer behind my desk." "Well, we don't have to go to that extreme." He waited for her to lock the hallway door. Maybe for you, we should start with something small and safe, like flying kites." She turned a skeptical gaze on him. "Kites?" He shrugged. "So long as we anchor you to the ground, I don't think you could hurt yourself too badly." "Gee, thanks." "Then we can work our way up to, say, bowling or something." "Oh, great." Lisa pushed through the door to the stairwell and started climbing to the 3rd level. "By the way, what's up with parking on the 3rd level anyway?" he asked from behind her as they climbed. "Wouldn't it be easier to park on the floor you work on?" "Exercise," she said as she opened the door and stepped out into the parking garage. To the far right sat her car. Right next to it sat the dark muscle car with the top pulled down. "How'd you find me anyway?" "Car, building, directory, Lisa." He shrugged as his hands found his pockets. It wasn't hard. The logistics weren't bad. It was convincing his brain that this was all a good idea that had been the difficult part. "How about we go for some supper?" "Hot dogs?" she asked. "Your call." Talking with him, being with him, was so unbelievably easy. The whole "when is this going to turn into a wrestling match" thing was simply a non-issue with him. At the little cafe, he sat on one side of the booth, she on the other. No questions, no pressure. In fact, he didn't so much as even reach out to take her hand, and by the time they were speeding back through the Houston night to her car, the need to just touch him was overwhelming. So, when he laid his hand on the gear shift, hers slipped over his and caught there. She smiled over at him as the night floated past them. "You know, you're going to have to teach me to drive this thing sometime," she said, brushing a wind-kissed strand of hair from her eyes. His gaze jumped to hers in surprise. "You got a day in mind?" Friday, Saturday, Sunday? It didn't matter. To her heart, any day, any minute that she could spend with him was the only one she wanted to be living. This has been To Protect and Serve, Volume 1 of the Courage series. Written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings. This has been a Braveheart Audiobooks production.
You don't want to miss what comes next. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.